Hey everybody, it's Never, and I'm here in the Dragon beautiful Orgrimmar. And today I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. Number one is that the pre-patch is just around the corner. It's just a day or so away. And I hope you finished everything that you wanted to do for the pre-patch because, well, you're running out of time. But today I wanted to mostly discuss roleplay. I had a couple of people comment on some roleplay videos I made a while ago, and I thought, oh, I've got some more to say on that subject. So I wanted to go over some general tips for roleplay and the way that I approach a lot of it that I haven't covered in other things. And I don't have a lot of this written down, so this is really just sort of procedural off the top of my head in a casual way to hopefully help out with people that are looking to get a little more into it. So the roleplay guide I made before goes over some basic ideas like character creation and some stuff like that. And I wanted to branch out on a little bit of that some more to talk about mainly two topics. One is how to roleplay reactively and how to roleplay proactively, and when to use either one. So reactive roleplay is what I do the most, and that's where you're there and you're waiting for other people to make a move, and then you make a move in response to it. And the reason that I use this the most is because it accomplishes two things that are really useful. Number one is it allows you to build a very real feeling story. So if my character is afraid of snakes, for example, and there is a snake back there, if my character is afraid of snakes and the roleplay party is going somewhere and there's a snake, then it just allows me, because it's reactive, because I'm reacting to the environment around me, there's a snake there, and all I do is I might go over this way instead. I don't need to say anything about it, I just go this other way. If someone says something about it, then that's great. I can react to that, and I can mention, well, I'm terrified of snakes. They give me the heebie-jeebies. In fact, I am going to kill that snake because I hate them so much. And all of a sudden I've got something about my character that's moderately interesting and comes up organically in the story just by reacting to something. And so reactive roleplay is sort of the baseline that I start with, and that's what I like to use the most. The other good thing about it is it allows other people to tell their stories. So proactive gameplay is where you are taking the lead and you are telling your story, hoping that other people will react to it. And this is necessary sometimes, but most people try to do this. Most people want to tell their story and want you to be involved in it. If it's a good story, then there's room for you or other people to fit into it. If it's not such a great one, then it might end up feeling a little forced because they're doing their thing and they just kind of want you along for an audience, which isn't really what roleplay is. Roleplay is inclusive and has other people in it, otherwise you're really just kind of acting something out on your own. So I'll refer to these terms a lot, reactive and proactive gameplay or roleplay, but most of what I'm talking about is reactive roleplay because it's a better experience for everyone involved and it makes more organic, more alive feeling stories with people. You just look at your environment and you react to it. And it's a very fulfilling way to roleplay. And I find that I tell my best stories when I'm reacting to other people's stories and then involving my own stuff within it. An example of how it might go off the top of my head is, let's just take a look around here and do some of this reactive stuff. So look at this guy. If you watch the show, I'm really, really happy that you're here. Iladrian, the level 32 Blood Elf Mage, who kind of looks like a bit of a ladies' man with the silk shirt and the leather pants and stuff. This guy, if I had to make a guess, knows how to have a good time and wants to make sure that you have a good time with him. And so just because of that, you know, let's assume that's how he roleplays this character, if he roleplays it at all. Then he doesn't have a super over-the-top staff, so he's a pretty down-to-earth sort of fellow. And how would I involve my own story with this? Well, I would follow him, and again, we'll just go off the top of my head. I'm just making this up, but let's assume that there's some really cute Tauren girl that he saw that he really wants to go talk to and impress her with his magic. And so we go off and we're heading to Crossroads or whatever, and we're going to go talk to her, and that's that. Now, whatever it is, let's say that I've got a problem to where I've got my instrument here, and I need to get the enchantment on here that makes it really loud. I need to get that thing renewed, and I can't do it alone. I've got to stop by and talk to someone. And so while we're on our way to Crossroads, I could just say, well, hey, we've got to stop by the Crossroads, and I've got to get this thing taken care of. But it's up here at Nozzlepot's outpost because I need a goblin to help me do it. And so that's something that we can interject in there. We're still going along with his story, but then we've got something in addition to mine. However I decide that this goes, we go up to Nozzlepot's outpost, and maybe he's not there, or he's been killed by something, and so now I've got to find some other way to get my amplification enchantment re-upped. And then we'll go to Crossroads and see what else we can find. And I can just make this up as I go, which is what most roleplay is. But you see how you can interject your own ideas into someone else's story without taking it over and supplementing it, because you can be supporting what they're doing the whole time. And so this is where reactive roleplay really shines, is this guy can just be doing what he wanted to do in the first place, and all we're doing is we're building on it. We're adding to it. He lays the foundation with his original story, and you simply build your stuff on that foundation. And before you know it, you've got your own foundation that's been kind of made in the background simply by doing these things. So let's take a look at the way that you take that concept and then you run with it and go a little farther. There is a wonderful show on Netflix. It used to just be on regular TV, but it's on Netflix, that I will recommend to anyone who loves storytelling or who just wants a good show to watch. It's called Arrested Development, and it's one of the greatest things ever made by human beings. And there's a lot of really good science behind how Arrested Development's humor works, because it's very layered, and I can't really say that it's necessarily super cerebral or deep humor, but it's done in a very masterful way. So it's really, the concept is simply running gags. You've got these jokes or these memes almost that keep coming up over and over again, and they change shape a little bit so that they stay fresh. And so one of those, and I won't spoil anything for anyone who hasn't seen it, I'm not going to spoil any story things or whatever, but one of those is the phrase, "I've made a huge mistake." And those of you who know this show will recognize that immediately, but the way that happens is you'll have one character, they'll say that, and yep, they make a huge mistake, and then they'll say that, "I've made a huge mistake." And then later they'll say it again, and it becomes something that you remember and you expect. And the next time they get into some trouble, you'll expect them to say, "I've made a huge mistake." And then they'll turn it on its head, and maybe another character will say it. Or they'll say it in a slightly different way. It just iterates and changes only slightly after it's well established to keep it fresh. And that's something that you can do with your role play, for example. Let's say that your character, whenever, it's like seeing snakes. You can be afraid of snakes, and that's really cool, and that causes all sorts of trouble, because if you're going around Orgrimmar or Durotar or the Crossroads or the Barrens, you're going to see snakes, and it's going to cause some trouble, and maybe you can't even get where you're trying to go without a huge detour because there's snakes in the way. And the joke could be is that in your story you kind of work it out so that you need to go somewhere like maybe Gundrak for something. That place is loaded with snakes, and so a payoff for that joke would be, here you are, here's a bunch of snakes, what are you going to do? And then you can make some story choices, like maybe you overcome your fear of snakes by just being flooded with the stimuli, or maybe it messes you up so bad that you see anything that even looks like a snake and now you're terrified of it. Somebody has a snake staff, or staves in general, or something like that. This cactus looks like a snake, and it could really mess you up, and that's a whole nother direction your story can go. So it's building on these ideas by taking the same simple concept, fear of snakes or whatever it is, and bringing it back with gradual slight changes all along the way and making it memorable. You can't have too many of these things per character at a time because it's too hard to keep track of them, but if you end up, oh, there he goes, to find that Tauren girl that he was so interested in. Good luck. Good luck, Iladrian. I can't remember. He was there a second ago. I can't even remember what his title is. Seeker. It was the Seeker. So find some things that work for your character and have them come back up. They can be catchphrases. They can be behaviors. They can be it can be something about your transmog. I like to take my transmog and make it something that comes into play in my story, because then it makes it all tie together a little better. So other ideas or examples of this concept, there was one that Dave Letterman did on his show where he just kept saying the words ball lightning. And at first it was just annoying. He'd just say it and then nothing happened. But by the end of the episode, for a lot of people, not everyone, but for a lot of people, it was hilarious because you knew he was going to say it. He said it about everything, but he'd say it a little differently every time. And you knew he was going to say it. And it was so funny when he did because it paid off, because you expected it and then it came in a different way than you were expecting. And that's just like, why did the chicken cross the playground? To get to the other slide. See, that's almost funny because it's the word slide instead of side, and they rhyme, and it's almost the same thing. It's a joke, and jokes a lot of time they hit us where we don't expect, and that's why humor works. Another good example of this is, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." And you hear him say that a couple of times, and then you want to hear him say it, in the end when it really happens. And then he does, and he starts saying it over and over and over again, and it becomes a thing. It goes from being funny to becoming something really impactful just because it was used. And he said it almost exactly the same every time, but it was the frequency at which it was used that changed it. So it's where things start off and then you tie into them later on, and it's like you're referencing the past with the present and you're foreshadowing the future. This is something that some people in storytelling, and this is a really general look at this concept, but it's a concept called ring theory, which is something that George Lucas will talk about, and you can see it really prevalent in, especially in a couple of works. You can see it in Star Wars. It's very, very prominent in Star Wars, and it's also prominent in the Back to the Future series, where if you look in Back to the Future, and there's some Back to the Future spoilers here, but I figure it's been long enough. It's been almost like 30 years or so before those movies came out, since the movies came out. So spoilers. You see where Marty goes through the same exact thing several different times, like where he gets hit in the head. There's a chase scene, and he gets hit in the head, and then he wakes up, and some mother figure, whether it's like his some odd number great grandma, or his mom when she was young, or his mom in the future, is he's waking up and she's talking to him. And he says he had a horrible nightmare where such and such happened. And then she says, "Oh, well, everything's fine. You're back here in the good old whatever it is, back here in 1885, or on the 27th floor, or wherever it happens to be." And the scene is almost exactly the same each time, but there's just enough of a difference that it starts to feel comfortable. It feels procedural, but it takes a bit of a turn with the details. And this happens, watch through Back to the Future again sometimes and try and take note of all the different ways it does this. You have to watch it backwards and forwards a couple of times to see all of them because there's so much. And Star Wars does the same thing. It's like whenever somebody says, "I've got a bad feeling about this," you know that something's about to happen. And similarly, there's a lot of other little details that each character does and that the narrative of the movie does overall that call back to past things, and it follows a pattern. You can even see this in music and in album production, where if you look at Metallica's albums, for example, generally they start off the album with a fast and heavy main track that's going to get everybody's attention. Then it goes to a weird song, then it goes to an even weirder song, then it goes to a ballad. Then it goes to number 5 is just like number 1. And usually number 2 is the title track because it's not quite a mainstream, it's not quite a single song, but it's really close to one, so it ends up being a single, but it's not like a flagship single song, it's just a title track. And this is just how they do it. There's a lot of other artists or groups that copy the same format, but you get to number 5 and it basically repeats itself. 5 is another main, not a title track, but a main track that is kind of their bread and butter. And then 6 is kind of a slower, stranger one. 7's another weird or mellow one. 8's a ballad. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you'll see this approximate pattern with little variation repeated throughout almost all of their albums. There's, again, some variation to it, but it's a very strong format because you have something that's attention-getting and eye-grabbing, and then it lets off a little bit and kind of relaxes to something that's slightly more relaxing but still pretty strong, relaxes a tiny bit, relaxes a lot to a ballad, and then jumps right back up to something really heavy and really fast. And so you see this concept all over the place of the past being referenced by the present and foreshadowing the future. So when you're planning out your overall story, take a look around you and see things that you can call back to that already happened, and then include now, and then remember to include later. So another thing to talk about is something called triggers. And I'm not talking about social justice warrior nonsense. I'm talking about things that evoke an involuntary response in your character. And invoke. And this is sort of like what I was talking about with the snakes, but it can be a bunch of other things where you pre-plan this out. Like I would use it with duels. When I was doing combat in some of the roleplay that I remember the best, I didn't use slash commands to roll the dice or anything like that. That's fine. I prefer to use actual PvP with it for one really important reason, is that the outcome is not predicted by chance. The outcome is predicted by action. And the reason that that's so good is I will try my best to win. And I feel like there's something at stake. Like there was one time where it was almost my character's life, like my character's in-story life at stake over this fight. And I did everything I could to win that fight. And I won, but had I lost, then that would have affected how my story went beforehand. And so what I did was I set up in my mind, I set up a couple of different triggers to where if this happens, if someone else does this, then I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to follow this path on my story. If someone does this other thing, I'm going to follow that path. And you plan it out, and then you let other people decide. It's even okay to let them know. It's like you say, hey, I need to ask such and such if they will agree to this plan that I've made about whatever it is. And somebody, you let somebody know. It's like, hey, this really, it all hinges on this. And you have them come with you, and then you go and you talk to the other character, and they don't know what's going on. And you ask them if they'll agree to it. If they say no, then you do the one thing you plan. If they say yes, you do the other thing. And it changes your story's direction based on someone else's action. And that's it's an on-the-edge way to live with your roleplay, and it's very fulfilling because it makes things matter. And if they matter, even in a tiny way with the direction your story is going, you get more invested and you get more out of it. So that's what I like to call triggering, where you set up possible triggers where if somebody does something, then it's going to cause specific behavior in you that changes the direction of your story. So you take the direction of your story a little bit out of your own hands and put it in the hands of the people you're role-playing with, because it not only forces you to think on your feet and it forces the story to feel organic and alive, but it also gives the others a sense of power that their decisions matter in someone else's story, and that's a very gratifying thing to have. So reactive roleplay is a very generous way to roleplay, and you can't do it all the time. Sometimes you have to be proactive and lead people on stuff, especially if you're running an event or something, but whenever someone else is in charge, be reactive because it brings out the best in everyone. And you still have a lot of fun doing it. It's not something where you're just kind of brain dead. You listen and you participate instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. So the next thing is using items to enhance your roleplay. And I'll just go over this really quick because there's a ton of different examples of how it works. You can think of a bunch of stuff, but I'll just look at like my toys here. And I've got like my Legion pocket portal. Real simple. If I want to do some sort of thing where, hey, we're all going to travel to such and such. Like, let's say I want to say we're traveling into the void for this part of the story. And I might use some place like Netherstorm. That's a pretty decent place to represent the void. And it looks all purple. So I would just push this thing, and it's like, okay, everyone, hurry quick. Get into the portal. And everybody mimes going through the portal, and then, okay, we'll meet back up in Netherstorm and finish this out. And you don't have to do this. You can just say, hey, everybody got in the portal, and you can just type it out. But by having that thing there, it just adds a little bit of depth to it. And that's great. Or you could do something really hey, look at all the dead imps. Something really trivial. This guy. Hey, look, it's my puntable marmot. If somebody can kick him over the street here, then we'll do such and such. All right, good. And this thing actually has a variance in how far it can fly. And so that's another thing that you can set up a trigger for, and that can determine exactly how you're going to go through with something. Or if everybody's waiting around for something, perfect time to use one of these weird toys like this fish that you can kick. And so, I mean, a lot of us, people collect toys because they're fun, or at least the idea of them is fun. But so seldom do people actually use them. I hardly ever see anyone playing with their toys out in Orgrimmar while they're waiting for stuff. Most of the time it's waiting to pull the boss in the raid is where I see this, but there are other places where you can do it so long as you're paying attention. So use some items to help support your roleplay. If you are a druid, let's see, where is that thing? If you're a druid, then there's a really great item that you can get from where is it? There it is. There's a really great item you can get from the Molten Front, where if you need to do some really impressive druid healing, or it's like the druids have healed the land, or whatever hippie stuff you decide to do, you use this thing called My Loons Call. You put this out right at the correct moment, and it really brings to life the idea that, yeah, this place is getting better. Look at that. We are healing the land with all of these allergies right here. And little things like that can really bring up the quality of your roleplay. And it's just, you just use them as you get a chance here and there. Be careful, because most of them have a long cooldown for some reason that I can't figure out. And so you want to make sure you're doing it when people are there and paying attention, but there's a lot of options that you have to work with that. So use some items to polish it up and make everything a little shinier when you're doing that. Less is more, but nothing is still nothing. And what I mean by that is, don't just use items constantly. Use a really important one at just the right time. There was one time where we were doing some role play way over here, and it was in the Ghostlands down here in Deathholm. And this is it'd take me too long to get there right now, but it's this desolate place ravaged by the Scourge, and somebody was kind of doing their own narrative role play where we were just kind of standing there waiting for it to finish, but we were being nice because he was kind of new and hadn't figured out the whole including other people in your story part of roleplay. But a bunch of us were sitting on a hill that's right here, just kind of waiting for him to finish, talking to himself and doing that part. And I pulled out this. Let's turn the music on. And I just sat there. And a few people gathered around me as the music started. And it's so appropriate for this part of the game. And I remember, I would say some stuff like, these lands used to be so beautiful, and then the Scourge happened, and it's really sad. And I was just talking about generic history type of stuff, but it got everybody's minds in the right place. And then having the music in the background, it made such a cool moment. And I still remember it so well today because it was so different, and that's probably the best use of an item I've ever had in roleplay. But if I had been spamming this the whole time, it wouldn't have had as much meaning when I used it at just that right moment. And so be careful. Like I said, less is more, but nothing is still nothing. So do stuff, but make sure that it has an impact when you do it. So just to sum this up again, be a reactive role player almost all the time. Unless you're leading the group, be a reactive role player. Let other people tell their stories and weave your story in with them, especially if you have experience with roleplay. This isn't that hard to do, and it's extremely beneficial. It's more fun, in my opinion, to do it this way, and it is also a lot better for the other people that are role-playing, because it makes them feel important. It makes them feel like their story is valid and their character matters. And isn't that really what we want to get out of roleplay? Is we want an experience we can remember and feel like it matters, or there was something there that we care about. So be a reactive role player. Find the things that you can refer to over and over again in your roleplay and tie back to them. Make some sort of continuity with that so that you can feel like there's a past, a present, and a future, and that it's really relevant to what you're doing, and other people will remember it. And then, set up your triggers. Let other people dictate the direction of, or at least let other people influence the direction of your story, because not only does it make it feel more validating to them and they feel more like they're part of it, but it also makes it feel like you're not just planning out your perfect story or your own fate. Your fate is in the hands of the environment around you. And that also makes you more invested in your character. I mean, the story that I have running for my character here is a long and detailed one, and I remember it, and it means something to me because I've allowed other people to influence so much of the direction it's gone. And without that, I would have been very limited on the things that I would have been able to choose to do. Because sometimes you think it's going to go one way, and then it goes a very different way, and you've got to deal with and react to that. And that's what makes characters vulnerable. And vulnerability makes people likable. So anyway, and finally, use items, but use them sparingly. Use them at the right time. That is some general additional advice in roleplay. Usually in the lull between expansions, for the next month or so, people are going to be a little more apt to roleplay because they'll burn through the pre-expansion event content really fast, and then there's nothing to do because all the stuff that you can't get anymore is going to go away the day after tomorrow, or well, tomorrow technically. So that's that. So if this is when a lot of people dive into roleplay or try and find some people to roleplay through the start of the expansion with, and so hopefully this helps you out. And I know this is a long formatted video, but I like to get my thoughts out and make sure I don't miss something. And if it's roleplay, you're used to sitting around and waiting for someone else to finish talking. That's just kind of how it goes, because like I said before, a lot of people, instead of listening, they just wait for their turn to speak. Try not to be that guy. Try to be the guy that listens and that uses what other people say and do in their own story. It makes it better for everyone. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that your roleplay is great, and I hope that you enjoy the launch of Battle for Azeroth. Okay, thanks, bye.